What if the person sworn to uphold the law becomes its victim? On a quiet summer night in New Orleans, Serena Holloway, poised to become the first black woman to lead an OCP, was pulled over without cause. Within minutes, she was in handcuffs, framed by an officer who thought she'd stay silent. But he underestimated her, because Serena wasn't just fighting for her innocence. She was fighting to change the system itself. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this? And where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The summer air in New Orleans clung thick to the skin, the kind of heat that made the streets feel heavier than they were. Serena Holloway loosened her grip on the steering wheel, taking a slow breath as she drove through the quiet streets. It had been a long evening at the mayor's office, where she had finalized the details of her new role. In less than 12 hours, she would be standing before the press as the first black woman to lead the New Orleans Central Precinct. She should have felt victorious. Instead, her chest tightened with the weight of what lay ahead. NOCP was notorious. Corruption, unchecked power, and the kind of systemic racism that didn't just disappear overnight. She had spent years fighting from the outside, first as a public defender, then as a federal prosecutor. Now she was stepping into the belly of the beast. Her phone vibrated in the console. She glanced down, expecting a message from the mayor's office, or perhaps an old friend offering congratulations. Instead, it was a simple text from her uncle back in Treme, the neighborhood where she had grown up. "Proud of you, be careful." Serena exhaled, gripping the wheel tighter. Her uncle had been around long enough to know what a black woman in power could face, especially in law enforcement. She had fought too hard to be afraid now. The hum of an engine in the distance made her check her rearview mirror. A police cruiser followed close behind, the headlights casting a sharp glare in the glass. At first, she thought nothing of it, but when the lights flashed red and blue, her heart gave a single heavy thud. She pulled to the side of the road, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. No reason to escalate, no reason to give them anything to twist. The door of the cruiser opened, and a figure stepped out. A white officer, mid-40s, with a square jaw and a smirk that felt more like a warning than a greeting. Serena had never met Darren McAllister before, but she knew men like him. He approached, tapping on her window. "License and registration." She rolled it down, keeping her hands where he could see them. "Can I ask why I was pulled over, officer?" McAllister's smirk widened. "Just routine." Papers. Serena didn't argue. She reached for her purse, moving slowly, intentionally, before handing him her driver's license and registration. McAllister barely looked at them before tilting his head. "You been drinking tonight?" Serena kept her face unreadable. "No." McAllister exhaled, exaggerated. "Step out of the vehicle." Her stomach tightened, but she did as told. She knew how this worked. Arguing would do nothing. She stood by the car as McAllister circled it, his gaze flicking between her and the vehicle, like he was searching for something to justify what was coming next. Then, without warning, he popped open her glove compartment. Serena took a sharp step forward. "You don't have probable cause to—" McAllister's hand moved too fast, a subtle flick of his wrist, a shift of his stance, and then he was stepping back, holding a small plastic bag in the air. He let out a whistle. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Serena's breath caught. No, this wasn't happening. McAllister turned to her, his expression one of pure amusement. "Ma'am, I'm afraid you're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance." Serena felt the world tilt, not from fear, but from fury. She knew she had been set up, knew exactly what game he was playing. McAllister reached for his cuffs. "Turn around." The cold metal clamped around her wrists. The last thing she saw before being shoved into the back seat was the flickering neon sign of a corner store and the city lights stretching beyond, a city she was supposed to protect. The moment Serena stepped into the Jefferson County holding facility, the air changed. It was thick with a scent of sweat, disinfectant, and something sour she couldn't quite place. Overhead, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a dim, almost sickly glow over the narrow corridors lined with rusting bars. She walked forward in silence, cuffs still digging into her wrists. The officer escorting her barely looked her in the eye. The murmur of voices from inside the cells grew louder. Some were aggressive, some amused, some simply indifferent to the arrival of a new inmate. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to be one of them. The officer stopped outside a cell and unlocked it. In you go. Serena hesitated, not out of fear, but because the sheer absurdity of the situation pressed down on her. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Move, the officer said, impatience laced in his tone. She stepped inside. The door clanged shut behind her. The room was small, cramped, and smelled like stale air. A single metal bench lined one side, and a woman with matted hair was curled up in the corner, eyes half open, watching her. Another woman sat on the bench, picking at her nails like she had all the time in the world. Serena stayed standing. Her mind spun. If she didn't get out of here soon, her career was over. If this leaked before she had a chance to fight back, her credibility would be ruined. Who would believe that the first black woman appointed as NOCP's commander had been arrested for drug possession the night before she took office? She pressed her back against the wall, inhaling deeply through her nose. She needed a plan. Across the precinct, Rachel Langston stared at the booking report in disbelief. She had worked at NOCP for 7 years, long enough to recognize a setup when she saw one. She knew Serena Holloway's name, not personally, but enough to know that she was not the kind of person who ended up in a cell over a drug charge. She grabbed the paper and marched toward the bullpen, where Darren McAllister sat at his desk, drinking coffee like it was any other night. "You arrested Serena Holloway?" she asked, slamming the report onto his desk. Darren didn't even blink. "That's what the paperwork says." Rachel narrowed her eyes. "You sure about that?" He smirked, setting his coffee down. "Langston, you're new to this unit, so let me explain something. People like her think they can do whatever they want because they wear a suit. But out here on the streets, they're just like everyone else." Rachel clenched her jaw. "You really expect me to believe she was carrying?" Darren leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "You think just because she's got a fancy title, she's above the law?" Rachel wasn't naive. She knew how things worked in NOCP, but something about this felt too deliberate, too clean. And Darren, he was enjoying it too much. Back in the holding cell, Serena finally forced herself to sit down. The woman on the bench, 40, maybe 50, with sharp eyes, glanced at her. "You ain't from around here," the woman muttered. Serena almost laughed. "I grew up 3 blocks from here." The woman smirked. "Then you should have known better." Serena's head ached. She needed to think. She needed to call someone. She stood and stepped toward the bars, trying to get an officer's attention. "I want my phone call." The officer on duty, a burly man with a shaved head, barely looked up from his desk. "Not tonight." Serena's pulse quickened. "I have the right." "You had the right," he interrupted, flipping a page in his logbook. "Now you have to wait." Her fists clenched at her sides. She knew the law. She knew what was supposed to happen. And yet, here she was. She turned away, exhaling sharply. That's when she saw him, a man sitting hunched over in the far corner of the cell, dressed in layers of dirty clothing, his face mostly obscured by his overgrown beard. But Serena recognized the shoes. Ragged sneakers, one with a duct-tape sole. Carlton Hayes. She had seen him a few times in the neighborhood, mostly near the bus station, asking for spare change. But tonight, he wasn't just another face in the crowd, because he had been there. She remembered now, when Darren pulled her over, she had noticed him standing in the shadows near the store, watching. If he had seen what happened, he might be the only person who could prove her innocence. She moved closer. "Carlton?" He flinched slightly but didn't look up. "It's Serena Holloway. We've met before." No response. She lowered her voice. "You saw what happened, didn't you?" Carlton finally glanced up, his bloodshot eyes flicking to hers before darting away. "I didn't see nothing." Serena's stomach dropped. Carlton had seen everything, but he was too scared to say it, and she couldn't blame him. Because here, in this place, the truth didn't always set you free. The cold steel of the handcuffs had been removed, but the weight of them lingered on Serena's wrists. Sleep had been impossible in the holding cell, her mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. They wanted her silenced, buried, forgotten. But she wasn't the type to disappear quietly. The following morning, the guards came for her, leading her down the dimly lit corridors of the precinct. The walls felt closer than they should have, suffocating in their familiarity. She had walked these halls before, as an officer of the law, as a prosecutor. Now she was being paraded through them as a criminal. She was ushered into a stark, windowless interrogation room where a single chair faced a metal table. She took a seat, her posture straight, refusing to let them see any sign of defeat. The door swung open with a casual creak. Darren McAllister stepped inside, radiating an air of smug satisfaction as he closed the door behind him. He didn't rush to sit. Instead, he took his time, circling the room like a predator, sizing up his prey. Finally, he settled into the chair across from her, one leg draped lazily over the other, his arms resting on the armrests as if he belonged there, as if this was his world, and she was merely trespassing. "You look tired, Holloway," he mused, tilting his head. "Rough night?" Serena didn't flinch. "You should know. You're the one who put me in there." Darren chuckled, the sound low and condescending. "Oh, don't make it sound so personal. This isn't about you, not really. It's about how things work." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping into something almost confidential. "And the truth is, people like you don't belong here." Serena met his gaze, unwavering, unreadable. "People like me?" Darren smirked. "You think just because you went to law school, because you cleaned up nice, that you can walk in and change things? This system isn't built for you, Holloway. It never was." Serena exhaled slowly. The old anger, the one she had carried since she was a child, watching her neighborhood get torn apart by the very people meant to protect it, simmered just beneath her skin. But she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing it. Instead, she gave him something else, a slow, knowing smile. "You think I don't know that?" she said, her voice steady. "You think I walked into this job believing it was built for me? No, McAllister. I walked in knowing it was broken, and I came here to fix it." Darren's jaw tightened for half a second before he forced another smirk. "Fix it? You won't get the chance. You'll be convicted before you even step foot in that office. No one will believe you." Serena's fingers curled against the table. "I don't need them to believe me. I need them to see the truth. And they will." Darren's smirk faltered, just slightly. He stood up abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "Enjoy your stay here, Holloway," he said, walking toward the door. "It's going to be a long one." The door slammed behind him. Across the precinct, Rachel Langston sat at her desk, her eyes locked on the flickering screen in front of her. The dim light from the monitor cast shadows across her face, but she barely noticed. She had replayed the footage at least a dozen times, each loop tightening the knot in her stomach. The grainy video from the liquor store's security camera wasn't perfect. The angle was off, partially blocked by a dumpster near the curb, and the resolution made it difficult to make out details. But it captured just enough. The timestamp aligned with the exact moment Darren had pulled Serena over. Rachel leaned in closer, eyes narrowing. Darren was in the frame, his body partially obscured by the car door. At first glance, it looked routine, just another traffic stop. But as she watched carefully, something felt off. He lingered too long. His posture, the way his hand moved subtly inside the vehicle before he straightened up. Rachel had been a cop long enough to recognize when someone was planting something. Her fingers drummed against the desk, the weight of realization settling over her like a lead blanket. If she turned this in, if she even suggested that Darren had planted evidence, she wouldn't just be going up against one officer. She would be going up against the system that protected him. Rachel had seen it before. Officers who spoke out didn't last long in NOP. They were pushed out, discredited, or worse, left out to dry when things went south. She reached for her coffee mug, then stopped. The liquid inside had gone cold, untouched. Her thoughts raced. She had two choices: do nothing, stay quiet, keep her job, keep her head down, or step forward, speak the truth, risk everything. Her grip tightened around the edge of her desk. If she was going to do this, she needed more. A blurry video clip wasn't enough. She needed something undeniable. Rachel exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. Her gut told her this wasn't over, and she wasn't the only one who knew it. Back in the holding cell, Serena was pacing. Every second that passed was another second that Darren's lies cemented themselves. She glanced toward the far side of the cell. Carlton Hayes still sat there, head down, trying to disappear. She walked over, lowering her voice. "Carlton." He didn't move. "You saw what happened," she pressed. "You saw him plant that bag." Carlton finally looked up, his bloodshot eyes darting toward the guards before settling on her. "I didn't see nothing," he muttered. Serena studied him. "They got to you, didn't they?" He didn't answer, but she saw it, the fear in his eyes. She took a slow breath. "Listen to me. You don't have to be afraid of them. You saw the truth, and the truth matters." Carlton scoffed, shaking his head. "Truth don't matter in places like this." Serena swallowed hard. She knew he was right. A guard approached the cell. "Holloway, let's go." Serena turned as the door opened. "Where are you taking me?" The guard didn't answer. He just motioned for her to step out. As she did, she cast one last look at Carlton. He refused to meet her eyes. And then, just as she was being led down the hallway, she heard the whisper of another cell door closing. She stopped in her tracks. "Wait, where's Carlton?" The guard kept walking. "Not your concern." Serena's stomach twisted. Carlton was gone. And just like that, her last hope for proving her innocence had disappeared. Serena sat on the cold bench in her cell, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The air inside the holding facility was thick with the smell of sweat and stale coffee, but none of it compared to the bitterness curdling in her gut. Carlton Hayes was gone. The news had come first thing in the morning, released at dawn, no record of where he went. Just like that, the only witness who could clear her name had vanished. She rubbed her temples, trying to push back the creeping sense of despair. It wasn't over. It couldn't be. The sound of footsteps outside her cell made her look up. A guard walked in with a metal tray of food, a pale slice of toast, a lump of something that might have been eggs, and a carton of milk. He shoved the tray through the slot at the bottom of the door without a word. Serena sighed and picked it up, barely glancing at it. But as she reached for the fork, she noticed something. A folded piece of paper, tucked neatly under the toast. She carefully pulled it out, unfolded it, and stared at the words scribbled in quick, deliberate handwriting. "I might be able to help, but you have to give me a reason." Serena's pulse quickened. She read the note again, then again, her mind racing. Who? How? There was only one possibility: Rachel Langston. Rachel sat at her desk in the bullpen, staring blankly at her computer screen. The past 24 hours had been nothing but turmoil. She had spent most of the night watching and rewatching the grainy footage from the liquor store camera. It didn't show enough. Just Darren bending over into Serena's car. Just enough to raise suspicion, but not enough to be proof. She knew what she had seen, but knowing wasn't enough. Turning in that footage would mean accusing a fellow officer. Not just any officer, but Darren McAllister, a man protected by the system. She would be painting a target on her own back. She clenched her jaw, her fingers tapping restlessly against the desk. She needed more. She needed something undeniable. A soft ping broke her from her thoughts. She looked down at her phone, a message from an unknown number. "Look at the security camera outside Patel's Deli. Timestamp 11:43 p.m. Rachel's stomach twisted. Patel's Deli was just across the street from where Darren had pulled Serena over. Without hesitation, she pulled up the precinct's database and searched for external business cameras in the area. It took a few minutes, but she found it. The live feed from Patel's Deli. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she punched in the timestamp. 11:43 p.m. The screen flickered. The footage was clearer than the liquor store's camera. Brighter streetlights, a better angle. Rachel leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the video. Darren stood by Serena's car, just as in the previous footage. He opened her driver's side door, then hesitated, looking over his shoulder. Rachel's breath caught. A passing delivery truck rolled through the frame. The side mirror caught the reflection of Darren's hand, and in that reflection, she saw it. The slight, unmistakable motion of his fingers slipping something into the car. Her hands tightened into fists. That was it. That was proof. She sat back in her chair, exhaling sharply. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She could turn this in. She could take it to Vargas, push for an internal investigation, or she could do what Darren was counting on: stay silent. She ran a hand over her face. She knew what was at stake. If she turned this in, she wasn't just accusing Darren. She was taking on the entire system that let him get away with it. She glanced toward the holding cells, toward Serena. Rachel had spent her entire career looking the other way. Maybe it was time she finally did something else. She grabbed her phone, took a deep breath, and sent a single message: "Meet me in interrogation room 3 in 10 minutes." She didn't know if Serena would come, but if she did, they had work to do. Rachel sat across from Captain Eli Vargas, her hands tightening around the printed stills from the security footage. She had spent hours analyzing the video, rewinding and pausing at the exact moment Darren's hand slipped into Serena's car. It wasn't speculation anymore. It was evidence. Vargas flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable. He was an older man, grizzled, with lines on his face that spoke of decades in law enforcement. Rachel had worked under him long enough to know that he wasn't a man who acted without calculation. Finally, he exhaled and leaned back in his chair. "Where did you get this?" "Patel's Deli," Rachel said. The side mirror of a passing truck caught the reflection. "It shows McAllister planting the drugs in Holloway's car." Vargas stared at the images a second longer before placing them on the desk in front of him. He folded his hands together, his fingers tapping lightly against his knuckles. "You realize what this means," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight. Rachel nodded. "I do." Vargas picked up the images again, flipping through them like he was trying to find a way to dismiss them. But the truth was staring back at him. Finally, he let out a sigh and leaned forward. "Bring Holloway to interrogation." Serena barely had time to process what was happening when 2 officers came to her cell and led her down the hallway. She had been bracing herself for another round of questioning, another attempt to break her down. But when she was pushed through the heavy steel door of the interrogation room, she froze. Captain Vargas was already seated at the table. Across from him sat Rachel, and leaning against the wall with a smirk that barely hid his unease was Darren McAllister. The tension in the room was suffocating. Vargas gestured to the empty chair. "Sit." Serena held his gaze for a second before stepping forward and lowering herself into the seat. She didn't speak first. She had learned long ago that silence made people uncomfortable. It made them reveal more than they intended. Vargas placed the security stills in front of her and slid them across the table. "Recognize this?" Serena's heart slammed against her ribs. She forced herself to pick up the photos casually, flipping through them like they were nothing more than routine paperwork. But her fingers trembled slightly. There it was, the proof. She glanced at Rachel, who held her gaze. Not as a cop, but as someone who had made a decision that might cost her everything. Serena set the photos down and looked up at Vargas. "Are you asking me or telling me?" Darren let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "This is ridiculous. That's not proof of anything." Vargas turned to him, his voice sharp. "Did I ask for your opinion, McAllister?" Darren's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he pushed off the wall and crossed his arms. "With all due respect, sir, I don't know what Langston thinks she saw, but—" "You were at the scene," Vargas interrupted. "That's you in the reflection." Darren scoffed. "And? That doesn't mean I did anything wrong." Vargas leaned back, rubbing his temple. Then, almost as if he had just realized something, he narrowed his eyes at Serena. "Wait a minute." He turned back to the documents on the table, flipping through them quickly. Then he paused, his lips pressed into a thin line. He looked up at Darren. "You arrested Holloway?" Darren hesitated. Yes, of course, Vargas's gaze darkened. "Are you telling me that you pulled over Serena Holloway? The same Serena Holloway who was appointed as our new commanding officer on drug charges the night before she was supposed to take office?" The entire room went silent. Rachel's eyes widened. Serena sat perfectly still. Darren went pale. Vargas turned to Darren, his voice dangerously low. "Did you know who she was?" Darren opened his mouth, then closed it again. His jaw twitched. "That's irrelevant. She was breaking the law." Serena finally spoke, her voice steady. "No, I wasn't, but you were." Darren's nostrils flared. He turned on Rachel. You really think siding with her is going to save you? You think any of them, he gestured wildly toward Vargas, are going to back you up when this blows up? Rachel didn't flinch. I think the truth matters, and I think you're scared. Darren's fists clenched at his sides. Serena saw it. He was scared. Vargas straightened, his face unreadable. Then he pushed his chair back and stood. Langston, get McAllister's badge and gun. Effective immediately, he's suspended pending further investigation. Darren snapped his head toward him. You can't be serious. Vargas didn't blink. Hand them over, officer. Darren's entire body tensed. For a second, Serena thought he might refuse. Then with stiff, jerky movements, he unlatched his holster, placed his gun on the table, and pulled his badge from his pocket, slamming it down next to it. This is a mistake, he seethed. You have no idea what you've just done. Vargas didn't respond. He just turned to Serena. I need you to sit tight, Holloway. We're not done here. Serena exhaled slowly. Understood. Vargas nodded, then turned back to Darren. As for you, get the hell out of my station. Darren stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Rachel let out a slow breath. Serena picked up one of the photos again, staring at it. She walked out of the holding cell with her head held high, but her insides twisted with something between anger and exhaustion. The weight of the past 2 days sat heavy on her shoulders, but she refused to let them see it. No one apologized. Not the officers processing her release, not the ones standing near the front desk watching her with barely concealed judgment. Some of them whispered to each other, glancing her way as if she were an anomaly, a scandal, a mistake that had somehow slipped through their fingers. She kept walking. Rachel Langston stood by the exit, her face unreadable. Their eyes met for a brief moment. No words were exchanged, but there was an understanding between them now, one neither of them could ignore. As Serena stepped outside, the humidity of New Orleans wrapped around her, thick and suffocating. She inhaled deeply, grounding herself, before heading toward the car that had been sent for her. Inside the precinct, Captain Vargas rubbed a hand over his face before pushing open the door to the conference room. The atmosphere was already tense. A closed-door meeting had been called with high-ranking officials, and Serena's future was the topic of discussion. The moment he walked in, several officers turned toward him. One of them, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, wasted no time speaking. Vargas, you have to know this is a disaster. Vargas took a seat, his expression blank. I assume you're talking about Holloway. Who else? Another officer scoffed. She was arrested on felony charges. You really think the city will let her stay in command? Vargas folded his hands in front of him. She was set up, and we all know it. Maybe. The older officer leaned forward, voice sharp. But that doesn't change public perception. If we keep her in place, we're making a statement, one that might not sit well with everyone. And what's the alternative? Vargas countered. We let McAllister get away with this? Pretend like it didn't happen? What kind of message does that send? A heavy silence followed. Someone else muttered, the kind that keeps this place from falling apart. Vargas exhaled, leaning back in his chair. He hated politics, hated the games that were played in these walls. But he also knew that this wasn't just about Serena. It was about the power structure that had existed in NOCP for decades. Some people didn't want her there, and they were looking for any excuse to get rid of her. By the time Serena arrived at NOCP headquarters, the air was thick with anticipation. She could feel it the moment she walked through the doors, the weight of expectation, of scrutiny. She didn't slow her stride as she made her way toward the conference room, ignoring the glances, the hushed whispers. When she stepped inside, the discussion stopped. Every eye turned to her. She met Vargas's gaze first, reading the tension in his face. Then she looked around the room, recognizing several high-ranking officials who had conveniently remained silent when she was arrested. She took her seat, hands folded on the table. I assume we're here to discuss whether or not I'll still be taking my position? Silence. Then one of the officials cleared his throat. Serena, you have to understand. This situation is complicated. No, she corrected, her voice even. It's very simple. The man frowned. You were arrested. I was framed. Regardless, it raises concerns. Serena exhaled slowly, resisting the urge to roll her eyes. Let me be clear. The only thing tarnishing this department's reputation right now isn't me. It's the fact that one of your own planted evidence on an innocent person, and instead of focusing on holding him accountable, you're sitting here questioning whether I should still have my job." A murmur went through the room. Vargas didn't react, but Serena could tell he was watching, measuring the room. Another officer spoke, this one younger but no less condescending. "Look, Holloway, it's not personal, but keeping you in this position is risky. The media will report what they report," she interrupted, "but that doesn't change what's right and what's wrong." Tension stretched between them. Then from the far end of the room a voice spoke, a voice that made the entire table go still. "She's right." The room turned as the mayor of New Orleans stepped inside. The weight of his presence was undeniable. He was a man who had built his career on calculated decisions, never making a move unless he knew it was a winning one. Serena met his gaze as he walked forward, his expression unreadable. He stopped at the head of the table, looking around. "We cannot afford to cover this up." One of the officers hesitated. "Sir, with all due respect—" "No." The mayor's voice was firm. "The truth is out. Holloway was set up, and if we remove her now, it'll only prove that this department still operates under the same corrupt standards it always has." Serena's fingers curled slightly against the table. The mayor turned back to her. "Holloway, you will continue as the commanding officer of NOCP, effective immediately." There was no debate. It was a decision. Final. For the first time since her arrest, Serena allowed herself to breathe. But across the room, Darren McAllister stood near the door, arms crossed. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The hatred in his eyes said enough. This wasn't over. Serena stepped out of the conference room, her shoulders squared, her breath steady. Inside, the debate over her future had raged for nearly an hour. But in the end, the mayor's word had been final. She was staying, but that didn't mean the war was over. As she walked down the hallway, she could feel the weight of every gaze on her, some filled with silent support, others with quiet resentment. A few officers turned away when she passed, unwilling to meet her eyes. Others, the ones who had never wanted her here, let their hostility linger in the air. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her stomach tightening as she read the message from an unknown number. "You think you've won? You don't belong here." Serena's jaw clenched. She locked her phone and kept walking. Not today. Not ever. She pushed through the front doors and stepped into the muggy New Orleans night, the heat clinging to her skin. The parking lot was mostly empty, the glow from the street lights casting long, flickering shadows. Then she saw him. Darren McAllister leaned against a black sedan, arms crossed, his smirk sharp as a knife. Serena didn't stop. She walked straight toward her car, but as she reached for the door handle, he moved. "Leaving so soon?" His voice was casual, but there was an edge to it, a quiet menace that settled between them like a storm cloud waiting to break. Serena turned, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "What do you want, McAllister?" He took a slow step forward, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. "I've been thinking," he said smoothly, "about how fast things change. 1 minute, you're in a cell, your career in ruins. The next, you're sitting in that office, pretending like you actually belong." Serena didn't react. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "Must be nice," he continued, tilting his head. "Having people fight your battles for you. That's the thing about you, Holloway. You think you're some kind of reformer, but you don't get it, do you?" She raised an eyebrow. "Enlighten me." Darren's smirk widened. "This system, it wasn't built for you. And no matter what title they slap on your door, you'll never be one of us. You can't change it. You don't have the numbers. You don't have the loyalty." He leaned in slightly, voice dropping into a quiet sneer. "You don't have the power." Serena didn't blink, didn't flinch. Instead, she exhaled slowly, her expression unreadable. "You're right," she said, voice calm. "The system wasn't built for me. It was built to protect people like you. People who abuse their badge and think they're untouchable." Darren's smirk faltered, just for a second. Serena took a step closer, closing the space between them. "But let me tell you something, McAllister," she said, voice even, measured. "I don't need to be part of your system to break it apart. His jaw tightened, and then slowly her hand moved to her pocket. Darren's eyes flicked downward. Too late. Serena pulled out her phone and held it up. Screen still recording. Darren's face twisted, a flash of realization sweeping through his features. Serena tilted her head. "You were saying?" For a moment he just stood there, his breath shallow, his mind racing for a way out. Then his mask slipped back into place, but the confidence was gone. "You really think that changes anything?" he muttered, voice tight. Serena smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I think it changes everything." She tapped the screen and sent the audio file straight to Vargas. Then, just for good measure, she sent it to the mayor. Darren's hands curled into fists. He took a half step back, shoulders rising with tension. "You think they'll actually do anything?" he hissed. "You think I don't have people watching my back?" Serena tucked her phone away. "I think they're about to start watching mine." A voice cut through the night. "McAllister." Both of them turned as Captain Vargas and two uniformed officers approached. Darren stiffened, his face going pale. Vargas's expression was hard as stone. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and misconduct." The officer stepped forward and Darren looked truly afraid. "This is bullshit," he snarled, backing up against his car. "You're making a mistake." Serena tilted her head. "That's funny. I think that's what you said to me when you put those cuffs on." Vargas didn't wait for Darren's protest. "Cuff him!" The officers moved in, twisting Darren's arms behind his back. As the metal click shut around his wrists, the reality finally hit him. His head snapped toward Serena, pure hatred burning in his eyes. "You think this is over?" His voice was low, shaking. "You think they're just gonna let you—" Serena didn't let him finish. "I think," she said, watching as the officers led him away, "I have a job to do." The moment Darren was shoved into the back seat of the patrol car, the air seemed to shift. Officers who had been watching from the sidelines turned away. Some lowered their heads. Others, those who had doubted her, who had whispered behind her back, now looked at her with something else entirely. Respect. Rachel Langston approached, stopping beside her. For the first time since this all started, she smiled. "Maybe you actually can change this place." Serena exhaled slowly, glancing up at the dark sky above them. One step at a time. She squared her shoulders, turned toward the precinct doors, and walked forward. Serena Holloway stood at the threshold of the New Orleans Central Precinct, staring at the heavy glass doors that separated her from the life she had fought for. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the entrance, but inside the air was still thick with the weight of recent events. This was her first day stepping into the building as its commander. She took a steady breath and pushed open the doors. The hum of conversation and the clatter of keyboards momentarily died as heads turned. Some officers straightened their posture, others exchanged glances. A few whispered, their voices low, their words unintelligible. No one welcomed her. No one stopped her either. She walked through the precinct with measured steps, eyes forward, refusing to acknowledge the tension hanging in the air. She belonged here, whether they liked it or not. At her office, she found the door already open. Inside, Rachel Langston was waiting, a thick file in her hands. Rachel glanced up as Serena entered. For a second, the two women just looked at each other. Two officers who had started on opposite sides of the system, but now stood on the same ground. Without preamble, Rachel stepped forward and placed the file on Serena's desk. "These are cases flagged for potential misconduct," she said. "I thought we should start here." Serena picked up the file and flipped through the pages. Names, dates, complaints, a roadmap of abuse buried beneath years of red tape. She looked up, meeting Rachel's gaze. A small, knowing smile passed between them. Rachel had chosen a side, and now Serena wasn't standing alone. Darren McAllister sat in the defendant's chair, his hands cuffed in front of him. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as the judge took his seat. Serena watched from the gallery, her expression unreadable. Darren turned, his eyes locking onto hers. There was no more arrogance, no more smirk, just quiet, simmering hatred. The charges were read aloud: abuse of power, falsifying evidence, obstruction of justice. The words landed heavily in the room, but Serena didn't revel in them. This wasn't about revenge. This was about accountability. When the judge announced the verdict, guilty on all counts, there were no cheers, no celebration, just quiet resolution. Serena gave a single nod, then stood and walked out. Darren was nothing more than a symptom of a larger disease. She had won a battle, but the war was far from over. 1 month later, the press room inside NOCP was packed. Reporters filled the seats, their cameras trained on the podium where Serena stood. The department had been shaken to its core, and the world wanted to know what came next. A reporter raised a hand. Commander Holloway, what do you say to those who believe your appointment is controversial, given everything that's happened? Serena didn't hesitate. I say that's exactly why I belong here. Another reporter jumped in. What changes do you plan to implement? She exhaled slowly before answering. I can't change the past, she said, but I won't let the future repeat its mistakes. A murmur rippled through the room. Serena stepped back, the weight of her words settling over the crowd. Behind her, officers stood at attention. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to show that change wasn't just possible. It had already begun. As the press conference ended, Serena made her way through the station, exhaustion creeping into her bones. She stepped outside, letting the crisp evening air wash over her. Then she saw him. A man stood near the steps, shifting uncomfortably on his feet, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a worn-out jacket. His clothes were ragged, his face weathered, but his eyes were unmistakable. Carlton Hayes. Serena paused, waiting. Carlton hesitated, then took a small step forward. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking anywhere but at her. I wanted to say, I should have spoken up sooner. Serena studied him, then shook her head. You were scared. I don't blame you for that. Carlton swallowed. I think I've been scared too long. A beat of silence passed. Then Serena reached into her pocket and pulled out a small white card. She held it out. Carlton stared at it before hesitantly taking it. He looked down. Her name, a number, a way forward. If you're ready, Serena said quietly, come find me. I know people who can help. Carlton's hands trembled as he held the card. His eyes flicked up to hers, and there was something other than fear there. There was hope. Serena gave him a small nod before turning, walking down the steps, her stride steady, unshaken. She wasn't just leading a department, she was leading a movement, and she was just getting started. Justice isn't just about laws, it's about the people brave enough to challenge them. Serena Holloway's fight wasn't just for herself, it was for every person who had ever been silenced, every case that had been buried, and every injustice that had been ignored. Real change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't come without resistance. But it starts with one voice refusing to back down. What do you think? Can one person really change a broken system, or does the system always push back? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful narratives that challenge, inspire, and reveal the truths that matter.